destined to be a lawyer? Was anybody in your family, your dad, any of the uncles in the law business?
My father, Sam Sr.,
Right.
was an attorney, and he was my role model, so to speak. In fact, I attribute everything to my father, not to leave my mother out, but he was my mentor because he started with nothing. He came over from Italy at age 8 months, and his father died when he was 5 years old, so he had didn't have a memory of his father. But he valued an education, and he went to the normal school here for his up to high school. And in fact, John, can you bring that picture in from the front of my dad and his classmates from Old Main? My father, Sam Sr., had a mentor, and I just gave you that article of George McCune.
Right.
George McCune was a well-respected and loved professor at the college, and he took a liking to my dad. He saw that my dad was bright.
Hi, John. I'm Greg
This is
Peterson.
John-
Nice to meet you, Mr. Peterson. Nice to meet you. Sit.
So this is my dad, picture of my
Here,
father,
let's take a look here. Okay, good.
and he is probably 17 or 18 years old. These are old Fredonia people, Tats, and a couple of them are still, their ancestors are still in the village.
Why did they come to Fredonia? Was family members here already?
There was no family members here, but they had heard that there were grape farms here, and they were farmers.
Okay.
But my grandfather, my father's father, who came over here, his name was Cosimo, and they started a spaghetti factory, a macaroni factory in Fredonia. In fact, this is the first one before Bravo, before Joya. The first spaghetti factory in Western New York were the Dragos, D-R-A-G-O. That's my root name.
Yeah.
And they started a macaroni factory in Fredonia.
Okay.
And in about 1910, 15, somewhere in there, it burned down, and that was the end of the macaroni factory for the Drayos. And so anyways, this George McCune, the professor at the college, encouraged my dad to go on with his education. And he said, Sam, I want you to continue your education, and I want you to take the Regents exam. And again, my dad had no other guidance other than Mr. McCune.
Yeah.
And so Dad took the Regents exam, got a scholarship, and went to Syracuse, undergraduate school, graduated, got a master's degree, and then went on to law school. And he started with nothing, and that's why he's my hero. I was fortunate that I didn't have to worry about money. Not that we were rich people or anything, but my dad didn't have that luxury. He had to work from 4 o'clock to midnight every day at Syracuse to put himself through college. He had the help of a Regent scholarship. And then he became a lawyer, and he became village attorney in 1937.
Okay.
And he was village attorney for 32 years and retired. And he said to me, Sam, there's going to be an opening. I'm retiring from the village. Why don't you put your hat in? And I said, Dad, I saw all the headaches you had with that job. You'd come home and have things on your mind. And he says, Sam, take the job. You'd be good at it. So I did whatever my dad told me to do.
Yeah.
So I took the job as village attorney in 1967. And, no, excuse me, 1969. I was in the Army from 1966 to 68. And in 69, I took the position as village attorney, which is a part-time job. And I held that for 48 years.
Wow.
And that was, I felt good about that because it's a village I grew up in.
Sure.
And so I took the job seriously. I wanted to help the village as much as I was capable of doing. So
the sum total between your dad and you is over 80 years.
Yes, it's a long period of time. Dad started as village attorney in 1937, and I retired in 2018, 16, 18, I can't remember, somewhere in there, 16,
Wow,
18.
wow.
Yeah.
So what a run.
So,
When your dad was here, when he came back to practice, with general practice, I assume?
he worked with an old-time attorney from Dunkirk, well-known attorney, John Hurlburt.
Okay.
And John Hurlburt was a very renowned attorney in Dunkirk. And I'm sure Bill Foley and his father were acquaintances. And so he worked with John Hurlburt for a couple years, 2 or 3 years, and then he went off on his own to Fredonia, where he knew a lot of the people. And he had the job as village attorney in 1937. And he worked under some wonderful people, elected officials that were good people. And we were fortunate to have good elected officials in our village. So, yeah, my dad worked for attorney John Hurlburt. I would say he started with John Hurlburt 1935, worked 2 or 3 years for him. And that, you probably heard of the law firm of Herbert, Aller and Herbert, or Herbert and Aller. That was them. And,
Bill Aller.
Bill Aller, yeah, nice man. And and his father, John Hurlburt had a son who was very renowned attorney in New York City, from Dunkirk. He worked for Colgate-Palmolive. He was the attorney. I think he may have been chief counsel. And so my dad went up to, when he was in New York City, in those days for bonding for the village, you have to go to New York City and go through all this. Now it's all done by facsimile and remotely.
Sure.
And he went to pay a visit to John Hurlburt's son. And he welcomed Dad in. And Dad walked into this big office, and Dad said to him, he said, "John, where's all your files? Where's your paper? You got this huge desk, and there's nothing on it." He says, "That's all in the back room. Nobody sees that." So,
principally general practice. Otherwise,
general practice. Most of my practice has been real estate, work, and then municipal work. I've represented the village in a number of zoning, what they call our Article 78 proceedings, reviewing our local zoning board decisions in court, and I handled any of the litigation against the village. Wasn't much, not a lot, but there'd be something at least a couple times a year that have to go to court. Any negligence and that sort of thing, I didn't handle. Those were taken care of by insurance companies and so forth. So,
but you occasionally would go up to. You've been to the Court of Appeals, right?
I was at the appellate division.
Okay.
Yeah, did the appellate division once or twice before the appellate division. And then the most interesting case I had that I can relate to was the village was building the fire hall. The village firemen had worked for years to try to get this new fire hall, because the one they had was years and years old, turn of the century. And the village acquired the land down at the Canada Way Creek at the foot of West Hill here, where the fire hall is located. And we were ready. I did all the legal work to get the titles transferred to the village. We had a grant, and we got all the titles transferred, and we're ready to demolish these old buildings. And they were old, dilapidated buildings. I don't know if you remember, Greg. You might remember. You're old enough to remember Colonial Inn, or that was a hangout for all the college kids. But it was falling down. But about 2 days before the village was ready to demolish it, an injunction was put against the village from some historical people interested. There was history to that old building. They wanted to preserve it. Well, the fire department was very upset with that, because they had worked for years for this new fire hall, only to get it stopped. Well, I didn't want to be honest with you, I didn't want to handle that case, because I figured if I lost that case, the fire department's going to blame me for not having a fire hall. But I asked a couple other attorneys, nobody wanted to handle, so I said, I dig in my heels and I'll just do the best I can. And prevailed in court. The judge refused to grant the injunction and allowed the village to proceed to demolish it. And that was a relief for the village, but a relief for me.
You especially, So, backing up a little bit, Sam, when you came in, you were practicing with your dad. And your brother also got involved too.
Yeah, that's an important thing. I had a twin brother, David. And when I got out of the Army, David didn't go in the Army. I came back out of the Army in 1960. I was discharged in 1968. Came back here, and my twin brother, David, was in practice with my dad. So I joined my dad and my twin brother, David. And we practiced together. Dad passed on in 1979, Sam Sr., and then my brother died suddenly in 1984. But Dave and I worked together. We were very close. Well, being twins, we grew up together. And then after he passed on, I continued on by myself, and now I have my son John with me. And
Three-generation law firm.
Yep, and I have another son, Michael, and he's an attorney and a senior attorney with the Vanguard Mutual Fund out of Philadelphia. And he's got nothing I can help him with. It's all SEC regulate, very complicated stuff, but he's done very well for himself.
So with this, when you graduated from Fredonia, what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated from high school, Fredonia High School, in 1958. And from there, I graduated in 58 and then went to Syracuse University and graduated in 1962 from undergraduate.
Is this the Ernie Davis time period?
Yeah, Ernie Davis was a classmate of mine.
No kidding.
And he was in ROTC, and we were in the same classroom together. He was a quiet man, always well dressed, very collegiate looking, quiet man, and likable guy. And he, of course, passed away from leukemia, I think. Yeah, and during his summer training for the Cleveland Browns. But he was a classmate of mine.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I graduated from Syracuse and undergraduate in 62. 1965, I graduated from law school. Then I went in the Army for 2 years.
You drafted?
No, I was in ROTC, so
that's right,
had an obligation to fulfill.
Did you do it? Were you JAG at all?
I was in the National Security Agency
okay.
in Fort Meade, in intelligence in Fort Meade, Maryland.
So
And
did you get any intelligence there?
I don't know. It was a fortunate job in the respect that I didn't go to Vietnam. I mean, I would have gone if I had to go, naturally, but they signed me to the NSA, probably because of my legal background.
Yeah.
And we analyzed intelligence and so forth that came in during the war. We tracked troops, where they were, how many, the best intelligence, and then we'd feed that out to the field. And so that was 2 years in Fort Meade, Maryland. Although the first 6 months of my service, I had to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where they trained me in artillery. And so because that's how I got commissioned, and initially was commissioned in the artillery. But then after that, I went to the National Security Agency and finished that in June of 1968. I completed my service and came back to Fredonia.
When you came back to Fredonia, it had an active bar. Who were some of the older lawyers, some of the people that maybe some of the people watching this might not know about?
Well, there's one that was very famous that I'm sure that you're very familiar with, was Lee Town Adams. He was a very bright lawyer and very, I would call it to a certain extent a character in a nice sort of way. He always had chewing tobacco in his mouth.
Okay.
And Lee Town Adams, I liked him, I respected him, but I'll never forget, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'll never forget a day when he was in village court, and I was there for a case also. And he always had a book with him, always had a paperback, always reading, but he would be chewing tobacco. And there was a case going on, the judge, I don't know who the judge was, and he got up from his chair, Judge Adams, and he went over, opened up the window and spit out his tobacco. And it's why that sticks in my mind, I don't know, but I thought that was during the court proceeding.
Oh, wow.
So that was a funny incident that stuck with me for a long time. Of course, other attorneys in Fredonia. Jim Sommer, a very well-respected attorney, a very bright attorney, as I'm sure you know, and Jim was a good man. And Charlie Colasano was a little bit the opposite. Charlie was liked to talk. He was a good trial lawyer, and I remember Charlie Colasano.
Yeah, I get this image of Charlie, and because we joined forces when Charlie had retired, but he came back just sort of a stubby K guy, you know, kind of 5x5, and walk into a room and start a speech.
Yeah, he started a speech. He loved to talk, and he was good at it.
Yeah.
But another attorney in Fredonia who's what was well known was John Fitzgerald. And John was, everybody loved John Fitzgerald. He was just loved by Fredonia. Anybody who knew John knew him to be an honest, good lawyer. And he was a personal friend of mine also, and of my dad's. And John practiced for many years in the village, and did a lot of real estate and estate work, and always did an excellent job. And so we used to have sit at the park bench, John Fitzgerald and myself, and Elliot Rose used to run the Fredonia office supply. And we usually meet out there around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the village park, and with John and myself and Elliot Rose and my brother David. And those were good memories.
Solved many Fredonia problems.
Oh, we solved all. I don't know why the village fathers didn't elect us as trustees, because we had all the answers. I don't know if they were good, but we had answers.
But John Foster, also another guy around the Fredonia area?
Yeah, John Foster was an attorney, and he died fairly young. But John was a good lawyer, and he loved sailing. He loved the water. He always was. If the weather was good, he was out on Lake Erie with his boat, and he was a fun guy to be around, and a good lawyer and nice man. And he lived in the village. He grew up in the village, John Foster. And let's see, what other attorneys there was. There was attorneys that I knew of, but they were before my time. Frank Sawyer was a well-liked lawyer in the village for many years. And
was Bruce Manley, did he practice here?
Bruce Manley, another good lawyer, and a friend of mine. And Bruce was assemblyman for the state of New York. And I think he was in there for at least 2 or 3 terms. He was elected state assemblyman. And he was a friend of, actually, I think he was a friend of Rockefeller. Because Bruce was a very likable person. You immediately liked Bruce, and he was just a warm, nice guy to meet. And the lawyers we had in Fredonia were people you could trust.
Right.
You could give them deeds and escrow, and you knew things were going to be okay. There was never an attorney in Fredonia that I never had an issue with. And I think that's great, because you get to the big cities, you have to be careful. Not in Fredonia. The lawyers were very honest, and as you know, dealing with them many years.
Manley and Schober. Who was Schober?
Now Schober is Bill Schober. He came from a large family. I think there was probably 4 or 5 brothers, and Bill Schober is an excellent real estate attorney and estate work, and he still practices. And his brother John is a very good criminal defense attorney in Fredonia.
Now he was in Buffalo for a while, at least for a while.
I think he was for a while, and then he came down here. But John has his office in Dunkirk, and his brother Bill works there. I think not on a full-time basis, although the brother John is full-time, and he's sought after for criminal work, not murder trials or anything. But he's done some big cases, and he's done a very good job.
Where does Mary Schober fit in all of this?
Well, Mary Schober was the aunt of Bill Schober and John Schober. And Mary Schober never was married, and she had a law practice in Dunkirk. And she, some funny stories. I remember there was another lawyer in Dunkirk, Ray Barkowiak.
Yes.
Ray Barkowiak, I hate to use the word was a character, but he was. He was funny, always has, on a real estate deal, he'd say, instead of send me the deed, Sam, he'd always say, send me the script. He never called it a deed, he said, send me up the script. Yeah. And he died in church. He had a heart attack in church and died, but he loved the water and boats. And there was Bart's Cove on Lake Erie in the city, a little cove. They had a boat place. And Ray Borkowiak was a funny guy. He was always nice to deal with. And that's a good name because there's other older lawyers, the Woodens.
Wooden, yep. Wooden and Carpenter.
Wooden and Carpenter, yep. I didn't know them that well, but they were longtime attorneys, especially the Woodens were longtime attorneys in Dunkirk, and did very well. We were fortunate to have not only good attorneys, but honest attorneys that you could trust in our area, and many of them you've dealt with.
Yeah. Glenn Wooden, I think, was the one. Glenn Wooden, and there was a brother, wasn't there?
There's a father and son.
Maybe that's a father.
Father and son, Glenn Wooden, and I don't know if they had the same name, but it was a father-son.
Yeah.
And they worked, and of course, Bill Foley and his father Jake. I always call him Jake, Mr. Foley. Excellent people. Pleasure to deal with the Foleys.
Jake was intimately involved with the volunteer fire people, right?
Yes, I think he was actually a recognized expert on fireman's law, volunteer fireman law, and he was a recognized expert on that. If you had questions about fireman law, Albert Foley Sr., Jake Foley, was the one that you would get opinions from. He was good at that. And a nice man, funny guy, and of course Bill, and then Jeff Passifero would work, came into the firm, and they all worked together very well. And of course the son of Bill is the county court judge.
Town and Rubenstein, I vaguely remember them.
Yeah.
What's your recollection of those guys?
Yeah, Town and Rubenstein. Town was an old-time Dunkirk person, Dunkirk, Sheridan, Art Town. And he did a lot of real estate work and was very good at it. My dad always said if Art Town signed that title, you know it was good. You didn't bother looking at the search. He'd already looked at it. And Rubenstein was his partner for many years. Rubenstein and Town and Rubenstein, and Rubenstein was for many years an attorney in Dunkirk and had a big practice, a lot of clients.
You also, in this area, Rebecca Mary Schober, she was the only woman for a long period of time practicing here.
Yes, she was the only woman lawyer, and she ran for city judge against Ray Borkowiak.
Ah, that story.
Yeah, and Ray, and the story was that Ray was very upset that a woman beat him in the election. In those days, you didn't see too many women in the law practice. It was a rarity, much less a judge. Well, she won the election, and Ray was a little upset about that. But they got along good. And Mary Schober, she did mostly real estate work. I don't remember her as the judge, but she did win the judgeship and served as judge for a period of time.
When her name comes up in other interviews I've done, it's always that she practiced essentially late at night. And she would do real estate deals anticipating the next day's activities about midnight. And then call the attorneys saying, are you ready for this, or can you provide this at midnight prior to the 9 o'clock closing? That would be Mary. And the other thing that I remember, and I think it's true, the typewriter ribbon that she used in her typewriter was so faded that when she typed out a deed, you could barely read the deed because it was a fade. And a couple of lawyers said, Mary, why don't you get a new ribbon for your typewriter? But she was a good lawyer and nice, pleasant to deal with. You mentioned Foster, Fitzgerald. Ricotta Joe, was he practicing then, or was he did you know him just as a judge?
I knew him just as a judge. My dad knew him as a legal practice, but I knew him only as a judge. And great guy, and he was well versed. He was also city attorney for the city of Dunkirk for a while, so he had a knowledge of municipal law, and so he went to. I think he was Supreme Court judge.
Right.
And but yeah, a well-liked guy. Won the election for Mayville for Supreme Court judge, and many of the older lawyers had dealings with him. I didn't have too many. I don't know when Joe died, but I have an idea it was the early 70s.
Yeah. You practiced in some of these, with real estate stuff, and when you walk around Fredonia, having done it so long, and you looking at buildings, and not only probably done the title, but maybe the development and some variances, is it weird for you to kind of walk around and your brain just explodes in that kind of knowledge?
A little bit, because I have acquired a lot of knowledge, fortunately through my village attorney's job, seeing old deeds, searches, minutes from the village board meetings. For instance, the village park, our Barker Common,
right.
The center of the village, has got an interesting history, and Jeff Passifero knows a little bit about it as he's town of Pomfret attorney. Well, the deed to that park where our fountains are, was deeded by certain people, Hezekiah Barker and some other individuals. The deed was to these individuals as trustees for the town, for the inhabitants of the town of Pomfret. So just recently they were trying to figure out, well, who owns the park? Who owns Barker Common? Well, the deed didn't go to the town of Pomfret. It went to certain trustees who have been dead for 100 and some years. And so I was just talking to Jeff just the other day. He said, well, geez, they want to take a 4-foot, the state of New York wants to, by eminent domain, takes a little area near the intersection, Main Street and Water Street or Temple. And they weren't sure who to cite because these trustees are dead. And so that got to be a little bit of a legal puzzlement as to who owns the Barker Common. And in the early 1910, the town of Pomfret, by resolution, turned the care and custody over to the village of Fredonia. But actual title to that, who knows?
Oh, lucky. You get the care and custody.
Yeah.
And no title.
No title, yeah.
What a deal.
Yeah. So it's an oddity that you see. And of course, the biggest thing not the biggest thing, but the most important thing I got involved in is studying the history of the State College and how that was formed. And through my practice with the village of Fredonia doing the legal work, I would run across certain laws where the village of Fredonia established the college through taxing its inhabitants for $100,000 so that they could build the first building, and they deeded it over in 1868. They deeded built the building, acquired the land, built the building, and deeded it to the state of New York. And that acceptance by the state, when they accepted it, committed them to have a state college here in the village. So the state college, the origination of the state college was with the people of the village of Fredonia, not by Albany. They never put a dime into the original building. It was the village citizens that did, the taxpayers, and that built that building and had a contract that if you build it, you furnish it, you deed it to us, we, state of New York, will have a college there. So the village was farsighted. The village residents, taxpayers, were farsighted and courageous enough to do that, and brought us a state college here.
Which is remarkable. What an asset.
The village has been pretty even keel, and not much controversy, notorious type of controversy.
You keep an eye on it now that you're on the outside looking in?
Yes. It's in my blood. I've 48 years. I can't get away from it. I still listen to on the public access channel. I watch the village board meetings, and I give credit to anybody that runs for those offices. They're thankless jobs, and usually you get criticism. You don't get, oh, you did a great job. It's usually someone saying you did something wrong, including me. I might be critical of something I see, and if I see something, I do speak up.
Fredonia is a charter.
Yes.
Right? Not many villages have charters, do they?
No, there's probably, I'd say, there's 525 or 530 villages in the state of New York. There's probably only 12 charter villages still remaining. The original charter from the state of New York. And Sometimes it's, I've dealt with the charter. It can create some interpretation issues. When I've encountered those, I've had the Board of Trustees suggested amending the charter. And we've done that over the course of a number of years. We've made amendments to their charter. But I do like the charter of the Village of Fredonia. I would not be in favor of repealing it simply because it gives more home rule power to the village. It also has more of what you call decisions made by a collective body rather than one person, the mayor, making an appointment. It's done collectively by the board. That's the major difference between a charter village or the village and the state village law is, for instance, to appoint a vacancy in the village board of trustees, and under the village law, as you're aware, that's done by the mayor subject to the board approval. In a charter village like Fredonia, it's the board of trustees. The mayor doesn't make any, he can suggest people, but he doesn't make any appointments. It's all done by the village board of trustees.
And the mayor doesn't vote?
And the mayor only votes in case of a tie. Yeah. That's another very interesting point that you brought out. The mayor only votes in case of a tie vote. Other than that, it's a vote of the collective body. So I like that idea. And you have to remember with the charter of the Village of Fredonia, the charter was established in 1829 by a grant from the state of New York. Here's your charter, here's the rules. The state enacted the law, been amended from time to time. But when you think of 1829, that's not too far removed from the American Revolution. Yeah. So the people at that time, they didn't want any one person having power. That's why I think our village was established with a collective body making decisions rather than one person. They had already dealt with the king from England, and they didn't like one person. They didn't like power in one person. So our charter was established with a collective body, no mayor with much power at all, except to vote in case of a tie.
When I think of Sam Drayo Jr., I think of Village of Fredonia. What else should I think about you, Sam Drayo Jr.?
I try to be fair to people and patient. People that come in with me, some of them have some serious problems and stuff, and I try to be more than just giving legal advice, but try to help them with the problem and give them some advice. And I think that's important for a lawyer, to see things not just from a legal point of view, but from a human point of view, and try to work with them, counsel them, tell them, this isn't the end of the world. We're all going to be gone sometime. Yeah. So you take these things in pace and you'll get over it, and give them a sense of feeling when they leave the office that things are going to be better.
This has been great. Thank you. I'm sorry to have interrupted your billable time.